Hello, my friend. Tonight we're stepping quietly into colonial America in 1740, into a world where many things that would make you hesitate today are so ordinary that nobody around you gives them a second thought. Imagine opening your eyes before sunrise. For a few sleepy seconds, there's almost nothing to see. No glowing clock beside the bed, no phone screen waiting to tell you the hour, no electric light slipping beneath a doorway. The room is dark except for the weak orange remains of a fire that has been slowly collapsing into ash through the night. You smell wood smoke. You smell wool. You smell yesterday's cooking. And, depending on exactly where you have spent the night, you may smell several other things that are probably best introduced gently. Before we wander any farther, if these quiet journeys into ordinary lives from the past help you relax, you can subscribe to the channel and join us again tomorrow night. And while you're still awake, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. It is always pleasant to imagine all of us scattered across different places, somehow meeting in the same dark room of history. Now settle back, because your colonial morning is beginning. You are probably not alone. Privacy, as you understand it, is something of a luxury. Houses vary enormously according to region, wealth, occupation, and family size. But many ordinary households concentrate a surprising amount of human activity into relatively little indoor space. Your bed may stand in a room used for sleeping, storage, conversation, and work. In poorer homes, the distinction between bedroom, kitchen, and living room can become wonderfully vague, and your bed itself may contain company. Perhaps a sibling, perhaps several siblings, perhaps a visiting relative. In some circumstances, travellers at inns might even find themselves sharing sleeping arrangements with people they barely know. Nobody necessarily regards this as scandalous. Beds are expensive objects, warmth is precious, space is limited. Efficiency wins. You slowly sit upright beneath blankets that may contain wool, feathers, straw, or some combination determined largely by the thickness of your purse. The room is cold. That matters. Central heating is still several lifetimes away. The fireplace provides heat, but a fireplace is remarkably talented at warming the area directly in front of itself, while allowing distant corners to remain suspiciously committed to winter. During colder months, getting out of bed requires a small act of courage. Your clothing may be nearby because changing clothes is not the intensely private ceremony it becomes in later centuries. People are accustomed to bodies being present around other bodies. Although modesty certainly exists and varies according to circumstance, then comes one of the less romantic objects of colonial domestic life, the chamber pot. It may be tucked beneath the bed or positioned somewhere conveniently close. There is no indoor flushing toilet waiting down a brightly illuminated hallway, going outside in darkness. Rain, snow, or freezing wind is not especially attractive, so the chamber pot solves an obvious problem. It also creates another obvious problem. Someone eventually has to empty it. If you are wealthy, perhaps a servant handles that unpleasant little responsibility. If you are not wealthy, congratulations, history has assigned you another morning chore. Ideas about household sanitation are not identical everywhere, and historians have to be cautious about turning scattered evidence into universal rules. Colonial America is not one single lifestyle. Boston is not Charleston. Philadelphia is not an isolated farmstead. A prosperous merchant's home differs enormously from a frontier cabin. Still, smells that modern noses associate with poor sanitation are simply more common. Smoke is particularly persistent. A working hearth can send smoke into the room, especially when chimneys draw badly. Cooking deposits grease and soot. Candles and lamps add their own odours. Damp clothing dries near heat. Boots bring in mud. Windows exist, of course, but opening them during a bitter morning simply exchanges stale air for freezing air. You begin dressing. Your first important layer may be linen. This surprises some modern visitors to the 18th century because cleanliness is not necessarily understood entirely through frequent full-body immersion. Keeping linen reasonably clean matters greatly. Linen worn close to the skin absorbs sweat and oils, and changing or washing it can contribute to feeling respectable and presentable even when you have not recently enjoyed anything resembling a modern shower. The distinction is important. Colonists are not wandering around cheerfully believing dirt is wonderful. They wash, they clean hands and faces, they launder clothing, they sweep, they scrub household objects. But the routines, technologies, expectations, and availability of water are different. For now, however, you're merely trying to get dressed without surrendering too much body heat. You pull on stockings. Shoes follow, depending on your identity and circumstances. Your clothing might involve breeches, petticoats, stays, waistcoats, gowns, aprons, caps, coats, or other layers that immediately announce something about your position in society. Clothing communicates. A stranger can look at fabric, condition, cut, decoration, and cleanliness and make assumptions about your wealth and occupation. There are even legal traditions surrounding luxury and dress, although enforcement varies greatly. Colonial communities inherit older European anxieties about people dressing above their supposed station. Apparently, even in 1740, somebody is worried that the neighbours are trying too hard. Meanwhile, the household is waking. Floorboards creak. Someone stirs the fire. Perhaps a child carries in wood. Perhaps water must be fetched. Perhaps breakfast preparation begins. The day does not start by pressing a button. Nearly every comfort requires physical work performed either by you or, in wealthier households, by servants or enslaved people whose labour makes that comfort possible. This is one of the realities that can disappear beneath picturesque images of colonial interiors. A glowing hearth looks peaceful. Keeping it glowing is work. A clean shirt looks simple. Producing the flax, spinning fibre, weaving cloth, sewing the garment, washing it, drying it, and maintaining it represents hours upon hours of human effort. Even water is heavy. You notice this quickly when it must be carried rather than summoned from a tap. And so mourning possesses a rhythm that is slower in technology but not necessarily slower in labour. Outside, the first grey light is appearing. A rooster may be announcing himself with complete confidence that everyone has requested his services. The room becomes clearer. Rough timber, plaster, furniture, hooks holding clothing, cooking vessels near the hearth, perhaps religious books or a Bible in a literate household, perhaps newspapers or letters in wealthier urban surroundings, perhaps almost nothing decorative at all. Objects are valuable enough to be repaired repeatedly. A cracked item is not automatically rubbish. A worn garment becomes another garment, then perhaps a rag. Metal is reused. Wood is patched. Nothing disappears conveniently into a plastic bin and travels way before breakfast. You live among the consequences of consumption because those consequences remain physically close. And perhaps that is the strangest sensation of your first colonial morning. Everything is close. Your family is close. The smoke is close. The fire is close. Your waste is close. Your food production is close. The people who work for the household are close. Life has fewer invisible systems carrying unpleasant necessities somewhere beyond your awareness. You stand, stretch, and listen to the building waking around you. Soon there will be breakfast, work, animals, muddy streets, remedies, gossip, discipline, religion, and dozens of habits that seem peculiar from your distant modern century. But before any of that, you glance back toward the bed. It is large, warm, expensive, and very possibly occupied by more people than you would personally prefer. And tonight, when darkness returns, you may discover that having your own mattress, your own room, and your own private sleeping space would strike many people around you not as normal comfort, but as extraordinary luxury. For now, someone shifts beneath the blankets. Another person yawns. Apparently your sleeping companions are awake too, and the quiet colonial morning continues. The bed behind you deserves another look, because in 1740 it is far more than the private little island you expect a bed to be. You may think of sleeping as something carefully separated from public life. You close a bedroom door. You expect your own mattress. perhaps shared only with a spouse or partner. Even close friends visiting your home generally receive another bed, another sofa, or at least some arrangement that acknowledges a modern assumption. Sleeping space should be personal. Here, that assumption becomes much weaker. A good bed is expensive, not simply the wooden frame, but everything piled upon it. Mattresses require material and labour. Feather beds, when available, represent considerable value. Blankets and sheets require spinning, weaving, sewing, washing, and constant maintenance. In a household where every useful object costs time and effort, leaving half a bed empty simply because two people have not been formally introduced can look rather wasteful. So you learn to make room. Within families, children commonly share beds. Brothers sleep beside brothers, sisters sleep beside sisters. Younger children may sleep near parents or other relatives. Servants and apprentices can occupy crowded sleeping quarters elsewhere in the household. Exactly who sleeps with whom depends on age, gender, class, household structure, local custom, and available space. There's no single arrangement that describes every colony, but solitude is certainly not guaranteed. You discover this most dramatically when travelling. Suppose you're moving along a colonial road and darkness begins approaching. Travel is slow, roads can be rough, muddy, poorly marked, or occasionally more theoretical than physical. You cannot simply decide to continue another 50 miles before checking into a conveniently illuminated hotel. When an inn appears, you stop. Inside, accommodation may be limited. The innkeeper has a bed. Unfortunately, someone else may already be in it. This does not automatically mean the bed is unavailable. You may simply be joining them. Bed sharing among travellers has precedence throughout the early modern Atlantic world, and surviving accounts show that people sometimes found themselves sleeping in close proximity to acquaintances or strangers. Historians also cautioned against imagining that every inn routinely threw random collections of people beneath one blanket. Customs differed, and social boundaries still mattered, but the possibility itself tells you something important. A bed is accommodation, not necessarily private accommodation. You enter the room, a candle throws weak light across the walls. Your future sleeping companion looks at you. You look at him. Perhaps there is a brief nod. Apparently this is enough negotiation. Try explaining hotel privacy standards to him. He would probably be equally fascinated by the fact that your own century constructs enormous buildings containing hundreds of separate rooms, each with its own bathroom. Only so travellers can avoid meeting one another while wearing night clothes. From his perspective, perhaps you are the strange one, and that is worth remembering. Colonial people understand privacy. They seek secrecy, intimacy, modesty, and moments away from observation. They are not emotionally incapable of wanting personal space. They simply inhabit buildings and social systems that make obtaining it more difficult. A prosperous household may have multiple chambers and greater separation between family members, servants, guests, and enslaved workers. A poorer family may possess far fewer options. Sometimes the architecture itself encourages togetherness. Rooms can connect directly to other rooms rather than opening onto modern hallways. People pass through spaces occupied by others. Beds may stand in rooms serving several functions. Curtains around bedsteads, where available, offer a small visual barrier and help retain warmth. A curtain can become something like a temporary wall, not soundproof, not particularly secure, but psychologically useful. You climb into bed. First comes the practical question of clothing. Nightshirts and shifts are familiar possibilities, although sleeping practices vary. Whatever you wear. Getting beneath the covers quickly is sensible because the room may be cold. Then there is etiquette. Bed sharing does not mean social rules disappear. Quite the opposite. People living in crowded environments often develop detailed expectations about appropriate behaviour. Gender, age, status, reputation, and familiarity shape what is acceptable. An arrangement considered perfectly ordinary between two male travellers might be viewed very differently in another social combination. Communal sleeping therefore exists inside a complicated moral landscape. You cannot reduce it to the amusing statement that everyone sleeps with strangers. History is rarely that cooperative. Still, physical closeness is unavoidable. You hear breathing. Someone turns over. The mattress shifts beneath you. Perhaps your companion snores with heroic enthusiasm. There are no foam earplugs, no white noise machine, no politely humming air conditioner. Only darkness and the sudden realization that 18th century sleep can be remarkably social in domestic households. This closeness also means children experience adult life differently. Conversations travel, arguments travel. Illness is difficult to isolate. Babies cry within hearing distance of almost everyone. A person who becomes sick may remain surrounded by relatives and attendants because there is no specialized medical facility waiting nearby. Birth can also occur within household spaces familiar to everyday life, with women assisting one another and midwives playing crucial roles. The modern separation of sleeping, illness, childbirth, work, and social life into specialized rooms and institutions is still incomplete. The household absorbs nearly everything, and beds themselves participate in that world. They can be places of sleep, sickness, recovery, childbirth, conversation, reading, and death. They are important possessions, probate inventories, which historians use to reconstruct household life, often reveal bedding as a meaningful part of family property. The precise value varies, naturally, but a well-equipped bed can represent a serious investment, which makes your modern habit of complaining that the guest mattress is slightly too firm seem rather luxurious. Then there are the less welcome companions. Fleas, bedbugs, lyci. Their prevalence varies, and dramatic descriptions can exaggerate the idea that every historical mattress is permanently alive with insects. Colonial households fight pests through cleaning, airing bedding, laundering linen, using herbs and other methods. But without modern insecticides, sealed buildings, washing machines, and highly controlled sanitation, parasites are familiar adversaries. Sharing sleeping spaces can make their travels easier. Your bed companion scratches. You immediately become suspicious. Perhaps it is nothing. Perhaps you will spend the next hour imagining movement against your skin. Sleep well. Yet people adapt because they must. The surprising thing is not simply that colonial Americans tolerate conditions you might find uncomfortable. It is how quickly ordinary life builds itself around them. You learn where to place your body. You learn how much blanket you may claim. You learn which noises to ignore. You learn when conversation ends. You learn how to create a small private world while another human being lies only inches away. And eventually the room settles. The fire fades. Outside, wind moves around the building. Inside, several people breathe beneath blankets that represent weeks or months of accumulated labor. Nobody thinks the arrangement requires explanation. Tomorrow another traveler may arrive. Another child may be moved into another bed. Another relative may stay overnight. Space will be found. Bodies will adjust. Warmth will be shared. Because in this world, the truly unusual thing is not sleeping beside someone. The unusual thing is having an entire warm room and an entire comfortable bed, completely to yourself. When morning finally pulls you out from beneath those crowded blankets, you may feel an immediate modern instinct to find a bathroom and take a long, hot shower. There is only one difficulty. The bathroom does not exist. At least, not as you understand the word. In 1740, washing yourself is usually a collection of smaller activities rather than one daily ritual involving hot running water, scented shampoo, conditioner, body wash, and 20 peaceful minutes during which nobody asks you to carry firewood. You begin with water. That simple substance already demands effort. Perhaps it comes from a well, perhaps from a spring, pump, cistern, stream, or another local source. The reliability and cleanliness of water vary enormously according to where you live. Urban residents face different problems from rural households, and geography matters greatly across the colonies. Whatever the source, water is heavy, A gallon weighs more than 8 pounds. Carry several gallons any meaningful distance and you begin developing a deep appreciation for plumbing. Now imagine carrying enough water for a bath, then heating it. There is no water heater quietly waiting behind a wall. You must bring water indoors. Place containers near or over the fire. Wait for them to warm. Transfer the water somewhere suitable and repeat the process. Suddenly a full bath begins looking less like hygiene and more like a minor engineering project. So you wash selectively. Hands receive attention. Faces receive attention. Visible dirt receives attention. A basin, pitcher, cloth, and relatively modest amount of water can accomplish much without filling a large tub. This is one reason historians warn against the familiar claim that people in earlier centuries simply never bathed. They did wash. They understood dirt. They cared about appearance. They noticed smells. What differs is the method and frequency. The modern daily shower is supported by an enormous hidden system of reservoirs, pipes, pumps, treatment facilities, sewers, heaters, and inexpensive manufactured toiletries. Remove that system, and your routine changes remarkably quickly. You pour water into a basin. It is probably not as warm as you would like. Your hands go in, then your face, perhaps your neck, perhaps other parts of your body are cleaned with a cloth. This kind of washing can be perfectly effective for ordinary grooming, particularly when combined with another important 18th century idea, clean linen. The linen closest to your skin absorbs sweat and oils. Changing it can leave you feeling cleaner without requiring full immersion in water among people with enough clothing and household resources. Fresh linen becomes a visible marker of cleanliness and respectability. A clean collar matters. A clean shift matters. A clean shirt matters. You may even judge another person's habits partly through the condition of the linen visible around the neck and wrists. In other words, your colonial neighbours are not necessarily indifferent to cleanliness. They simply define and achieve it differently. Laundry, unfortunately, is not relaxing. You do not toss garments into a machine, press a button, and return 40 minutes later wondering where one sock has gone. Water must be fetched, soap must be obtained or made. Clothing and household linen may be soaked, scrubbed, boiled, beaten, rinsed, wrung, dried, and sometimes treated with other substances according to material and local practice. Wash day can become serious labour. Women and servants commonly bear much of this burden, though household arrangements differ by region and status in wealthier homes. Enslaved or hired labour may make the clean appearance of one person possible through exhausting work performed by another. That pattern repeats constantly in colonial life. Comfort rarely disappears. Its labour merely moves to someone else. Soap itself can be homemade. Animal fats and alkaline substances derived from wood ashes are traditional ingredients. Producing useful soap requires knowledge and experience, and the result does not necessarily resemble the smooth, perfumed bar waiting beside a modern sink. Some households purchase soap when markets allow. Others produce it. Either way, nobody is selecting among 12 varieties promising mountain rain, tropical mango, or something mysteriously called midnight glacier. Your choices are more practical. Does it clean? Excellent. Now try not to get it in your eyes. Full body bathing certainly occurs, but frequency varies. Personal preference, class, season, location, medical beliefs, access to water, and changing cultural fashions all matter. Some 18th century people are suspicious of certain kinds of bathing, especially under particular medical circumstances. Others praise cold bathing or use bathing therapeutically. There is no single colonial opinion. That uncertainty is important because historical hygiene attracts myths. One popular image presents everyone before modern plumbing as permanently filthy. Another romantic correction imagines that people are almost as clean by modern standards, merely using different technology. Reality sits somewhere more complicated. People clean themselves. They also live with more smoke, sweat, animals, mud, insects, and human waste than most modern households tolerate. Body odor is familiar. Perfumes and scented substances exist, especially among people able to afford them. but they do not magically erase the physical environment. You can wash your face in the morning and smell of wood smoke by breakfast. You can put on fresh linen and spend the afternoon beside horses. You can clean your shoes and immediately step into mud. Cleanliness is temporary, very temporary. Hair presents another challenge. Regular combing matters. Fine-toothed combs can help remove dirt and parasites. Hair may be powdered or styled according to fashion among certain social groups. Although the elaborate powdered image associated with the 18th century should not be applied indiscriminately to everyone in 1740. Most farmers are not wandering behind a plough looking like they have just escaped a royal ballroom. Class matters. Occupation matters. Practicality wins surprisingly often. You also discover that washing clothes can sometimes be valued more urgently than washing the entire body, because clothing is part of public identity. If your visible linen is clean, your hair arranged, your hands and face washed, and your garments reasonably maintained, you can appear respectable. Nobody approaches with a clipboard asking whether you have completed today's 8-minute shower. There is also seasonality. Imagine winter. Water is painfully cold. The house is cold. Removing clothing is cold. Drying yourself is cold. Heating enough water for extensive washing consumes fuel that someone had to cut, carry, split, and store. Suddenly skipping a full bath becomes extremely understandable. Summer creates the opposite problem. You sweat more. Dust clings to you. Insects become persistent. Work outdoors leaves skin dirty. You may wash more frequently in smaller ways simply because discomfort demands it. Then there are communal expectations. Strong, unpleasant smells are noticed. Advice literature and personal writings reveal concern with cleanliness and presentation. Though standards differ across time and place, the notion that nobody notices because everyone smells equally terrible is far too simple. Human noses do not stop functioning just because plumbing has not been invented. You finish washing, the basin water is cloudy, and now comes another difference. It does not disappear down a drain. You must dispose of it. Every convenience has an ending. Someone carries the water in. Someone heats it. Someone uses it. Someone carries it away. Your morning hygiene therefore leaves you with a strange realization. The colonial world is not necessarily less concerned with being clean. It is simply a world where cleanliness has weight. You can feel it in the bucket. You can see it in the firewood. You can count it in clean shirts. And after all that labour, you may step outside, encounter a muddy street and a wandering pig, and undo half the morning's work before you have travelled 20 yards. But at least your linen is clean. For 1740, that counts for quite a lot. That clean linen helps you look respectable. But the illusion becomes slightly more complicated when you smile. Dental care in 1740 exists in a curious middle ground. People certainly know that teeth require attention. They experience tooth decay, bad breath, gum problems, broken teeth, and tooth loss with uncomfortable regularity. What they do not possess is the modern combination of standardized toothpaste, inexpensive toothbrushes, fluoridated water, professional cleanings, anesthetics, x-rays, and a dentist reminding them every 6 months that they really should floss more often. So you improvise. You might clean your teeth using a cloth, a small brush if one is available, or some form of tooth powder. Recipes and recommendations vary widely. Ingredients used in the 18th century Atlantic world can include salt, chalk, charcoal, powdered herbs, and abrasive substances. Some preparations probably remove debris reasonably well. Others may be harsh enough to wear enamel. Historical advice can become adventurous very quickly. The fact that a remedy appears in an old medical book does not mean everyone uses it, and it certainly does not mean it works. Household practice often depends on family tradition, local availability, cost, and whichever confident person happens to insist that their grandmother's method is unquestionably superior. Some things never change. You rub your teeth carefully. There is no bright mint explosion, no promise of 24-hour freshness. You simply hope the procedure improves matters. Sugar complicates the story. By the 18th century, expanding Atlantic trade is making sugar increasingly available. Although consumption differs greatly according to wealth and region, sweetened tea and other imported luxuries gradually become important parts of social life. Unfortunately, your teeth have not signed the trade agreement. Dental decay is hardly new, but diets rich in refined carbohydrates and sugar can make the problem worse. Archaeological remains help historians examine patterns of dental disease, though comparing communities is complicated by diet, age, class, geography, and preservation. If a tooth begins aching badly, your options narrow. There are people who specialize in dental work, especially in towns, but dentistry is not yet organized like the modern profession. Physicians, surgeons, barber surgeons, craftsmen, itinerant operators, and others may perform dental procedures depending on time and place. A severely troublesome tooth may simply be extracted. You sit down, someone produces an instrument. You immediately miss the 21st century. Pain relief is limited. Alcohol and various medicinal substances might be used in attempts to dull suffering. But reliable modern anesthesia belongs to the future. The procedure may be quick. That is perhaps the nicest thing one can say about it. If you are wealthy and sufficiently determined, replacement teeth are possible in various forms. 18th century dentures can incorporate materials such as ivory and human teeth. Although famous later examples have encouraged exaggerated stories about how common particular materials were, dental prosthetics are expensive and imperfect. Most people simply learn to live with missing teeth. Your smile tells a history. Then your scalp begins itching. Try not to panic. Least are familiar enough that combing hair is more than cosmetic. Fine-toothed combs have ancient histories and remain useful tools for physically removing lice and their eggs. People use various treatments as well. Some involve oils, powders, herbs, or stronger substances. Recipes circulate through household knowledge and printed medical guides. Effectiveness varies, and certain treatments can be irritating or hazardous by modern standards. The basic strategy, however, is wonderfully recognizable. Find the parasite, remove the parasite, complain about the parasite, repeat tomorrow. Your clothing can host unwanted guests too. Body lice favor garments and bedding, which makes laundering, changing linen, airing textiles, and maintaining sleeping spaces important. Remember that crowded bed. It has returned to the story. History has callbacks. Unfortunately, some of them itch. Bedbugs and fleas also flourish where conditions permit. Colonists are not passive about these pests. Bedding can be inspected, shaken, aired, cleaned, or treated. Bed frames and cracks may receive attention. Certain herbs develop reputations for discouraging insects, although historical claims about their effectiveness should be treated cautiously. You may tuck aromatic plants around bedding because someone swears by them. Perhaps they work a little. Perhaps your bed merely smells pleasantly herbal while the fleas continue their evening plans. Either way, you are participating in household medicine, and household medicine is everywhere. Minor ailments do not automatically send you to a physician. Professional medical assistance costs money and may be difficult to reach. Families therefore maintain knowledge about herbs, foods, poultices, teas, salves, purges, and other remedies. Women often preserve and transmit much of this practical medical knowledge within households. Midwives possess specialized experience surrounding pregnancy and childbirth. Indigenous knowledge also influences colonial understanding of North American plants and remedies. Though European settlers frequently adopt such knowledge without preserving clearly who taught it to them, African traditions enter colonial medicine as well, especially in communities shaped by slavery and the Atlantic world. So the medicine cabinet of 1740 is not one tradition. It is an uneasy mixture of European medical theory, local experience, indigenous botanical knowledge, African knowledge, religious belief, commercial remedies, and whatever your neighbour insists cured his cough last February. You might drink an herbal infusion, apply a poultice, swallow something bitter, rub something unpleasant onto the skin, Being disgusting is occasionally treated as evidence that a medicine must be powerful, a comforting principle that survives remarkably well into the modern age. Some remedies have genuine pharmacological effects. Certain plants contain compounds that can reduce pain, affect digestion, or alter other bodily processes. Others do very little. Some are actively dangerous. The difficulty is knowing which is which. Medical theory still gives great importance to balancing the body and interpreting symptoms through frameworks inherited from older traditions. Ideas involving humours remain influential. Though 18th century medicine is changing and practitioners disagree, you therefore live in a medical world full of competing explanations. One healer wants to warm you, another wants to cool you. Someone recommends rest, someone recommends purging. Your aunt recommends onions. The onions are somehow the least surprising suggestion. Personal grooming carries similar mixtures of practicality and fashion. Among fashionable men, wigs may signal status and refinement, though not every man wears one. Natural hair remains common, especially among ordinary labourers and rural people. A wig itself requires maintenance. It can be combed, dressed, and powdered. Hair powder is often made from starch and may be scented. The familiar white appearance develops from powder rather than necessarily from naturally white hair. Fashionable women generally style their own hair rather than routinely wearing full wigs in the same way fashionable men might. Though hairpieces and additions become more elaborate as fashions evolve. But remember where you are. 1740. Not every 18th century fashion has reached its later extravagant form. You cannot simply take an image from the 1780s and paste it backward 40 years. History refuses to dress everyone according to the costume department's convenience. You finish arranging your hair. Your teeth are as clean as you can reasonably make them. Your scalp appears peaceful. Your linen is fresh. From across the room, you probably look perfectly respectable. Up close, perhaps do not invite inspection. Yet that is unfair, because your colonial neighbours are doing something profoundly familiar. They are working with what they have. They clean, they groom, they experiment, they exchange remedies, they worry about appearances, they suffer toothaches and complain about itching. They buy fashionable products when money allows and improvise when it does not. And after completing the surprisingly recognisable morning routine, you finally begin wondering about breakfast. Something warm would be pleasant. Perhaps porridge. Perhaps bread. Perhaps cider. Yes, cider. It is still morning. Welcome back to 1740. The possibility of cider at breakfast sounds wonderfully rebellious to modern ears. As though the entire household has collectively decided that ordinary morning beverages are simply too dull. But before imagining every colonist beginning the day cheerfully intoxicated, the picture needs softening. Alcohol is common in colonial life, but consumption varies greatly by region, household, religion, age, wealth, and personal preference. Beer, ale, cider, rum, wine, and other drinks circulate through different communities, while water, milk, tea, coffee, chocolate, and various homemade beverages also appear. What feels strange is not that alcohol exists. It is how comfortably it can fit into ordinary daily routines. You approach the table. Breakfast itself is not necessarily the elaborate event familiar from a modern restaurant menu. There are no towers of pancakes decorated with berries, purely because someone intends to photograph them. Food is practical. Perhaps there is porridge or another grain preparation. Perhaps bread. Maybe yesterday's leftovers. In some households, you might encounter meat, eggs, dairy products, or regional specialties depending on season and resources. The colonies contain dramatically different food cultures. New England's climate and agriculture differ from the Chesapeake. Pennsylvania reflects a mixture of English, German, Scots-Irish, and other influences. Southern plantation regions develop food systems deeply shaped by African knowledge and the labour of enslaved people. Indigenous crops and agricultural traditions remain fundamental. Maize, beans, squash, pumpkins, and other foods cultivated in the Americas long before European settlement become woven into colonial diets. So there is no single plate labelled colonial breakfast. But bread is extremely important. Grains provide calories that working bodies need. Your bread might contain wheat, rye, maize, or mixtures depending on location and availability. Wheat flour of the finest quality can carry status. While coarser breads are associated with ordinary consumption in many settings, you tear off a piece, it is dense. Good. You are going to need the energy. Physical labour begins early and continues for much of the day. Farmers, artisans, sailors, domestic workers, servants, apprentices, enslaved labourers, and countless others burn calories without ever using the phrase fitness routine. The 18th century workout plan is remarkably simple. Carry everything yourself. Now someone offers you cider. You hesitate. They do not. Apple orchards thrive in many northern and middle colonial regions, and fermented cider becomes a familiar drink. Beer and ale are also important, though brewing traditions and ingredients vary. Fermentation has practical advantages. It preserves agricultural produce in another form, creates a valuable trade commodity, and offers variety in a world without refrigerated supermarket aisles. You may hear the familiar claim that colonial Americans drink alcohol because water is always unsafe. That is too simple. People absolutely drink water. They recognize differences between good and bad water sources. Springs and wells can provide desirable water, while polluted urban sources may create obvious problems even before germ theory explains why. Alcoholic beverages do not replace water universally, but they are deeply embedded in social and economic life. Beer might accompany meals, cider might be consumed through the day, rum becomes particularly important within Atlantic commerce. Taverns serve alcohol while also functioning as social centres, meeting places, information exchanges, and accommodations. Drinking can be normal without constant drunkenness being socially acceptable. Colonial communities frequently criticize excessive drinking. Religious leaders complain about it. Authorities regulate taverns. Families suffer from it. People make jokes about it. Once again, the strange historical world becomes suspiciously familiar. You take a modest drink. It is probably weaker than some modern commercial beverages, though strength varies widely depending on production. Now the table offers another reminder of the wider world. Perhaps tea is present. Tea consumption is growing during the 18th century, especially among people who can afford imported goods. The famous political symbolism surrounding tea still lies decades ahead, but the beverage is already becoming associated with hospitality, sociability, and status. Coffee and chocolate circulate too. These are not merely exotic flavours. They are products of global systems. When you drink imported tea sweetened with sugar, you participate in networks stretching across oceans, ships, merchants, plantations, taxes, imperial policies, enslaved labour. Every sweet cup contains a history far larger than the table holding it. Sugar is particularly revealing. Its growing availability transforms tastes while tying colonial consumers to brutal plantation economies in the Caribbean and elsewhere. The pleasant sweetness on your tongue rests upon labour conditions you may never personally witness. Colonial consumption can hide human suffering just as modern consumption sometimes does. Distance makes forgetting convenient. Meanwhile, closer to home, preservation determines what you eat. There is no refrigerator humming in the corner. Food must survive through other methods. Meat can be salted, smoked, dried, or preserved in various preparations. Fish can be salted or dried. Fruits may be dried, preserved, fermented, or turned into beverages. Vegetables can be stored in cellars, pickled, dried, or consumed according to season. Milk becomes butter or cheese partly because transformation extends usefulness. Your pantry is therefore shaped by time. Summer food does not simply remain summer food forever. Winter has its own rhythm. Spring has another. A poor harvest matters enormously because there is no vast refrigerated supply chain quietly compensating for local failure. Even ordinary spices reveal status and trade. Pepper, nutmeg, cinnamon, cloves, and other imported flavorings connect households to international commerce. Access varies according to wealth, location, and market availability. Then there are utensils. You may use a knife and spoon regularly. Forks are known and increasingly present, especially among wealthier people. But adoption is uneven. Fingers remain perfectly useful tools for certain foods. Plates and bowls vary from wooden trenchers and pewter to ceramic wares, whose quality announces wealth and changing consumer tastes. Do not become too attached to matching dinnerware. The 18th century is perfectly capable of surviving without 12 identical plates. Food also tells everyone where you stand. A wealthy merchant can purchase imported luxuries. A prosperous planter may display abundance produced through the labor of enslaved workers. An ordinary farming family relies heavily on what can be grown, raised, preserved, exchanged, or purchased locally. A poor laborer has fewer choices. An enslaved person's ration and access to food are shaped by coercive systems, though enslaved communities also cultivate gardens, hunt, fish, trade, cook, and preserve food traditions where circumstances allow. The same colony can therefore contain tables of extraordinary abundance and diets of painful limitation. There is no single colonial appetite. You finish your porridge, perhaps you add a little butter. Maybe there is molasses, someone passes bread. Someone else drinks cider without displaying the slightest sign that morning alcohol requires an explanation. Outside, work is waiting. Children already have chores. Animals need feeding. Water needs carrying. Wood needs splitting. Fields, shops, kitchens, docks, and workshops are beginning to fill with activity. You take another bite and realize how little of this meal is casual. Every grain has been planted and harvested. Every piece of firewood has been carried. Every preserved food represents planning against future hunger. Every imported luxury has crossed dangerous water. Even the cider began as apples that someone picked, crushed, pressed, stored, and allowed to ferment. Breakfast is not simply breakfast. It is stored labor, stored sunlight, stored summer, and occasionally stored alcohol. You push back from the table. You're ready to begin the day. Across the room, a child is already working, not pretending to work, not completing a decorative little chore in exchange for pocket money. Actually working, because in 1740, childhood is about to feel almost as unfamiliar as breakfast. The child across the room does not seem especially surprised to be working. That may be the first thing you notice. There is no dramatic announcement that childhood has ended. No ceremony marks the morning when useful household labor suddenly becomes appropriate. Children grow into responsibilities gradually, learning tasks by watching, helping, repeating, failing, being corrected and trying again. In 1740, childhood certainly exists. Parents love children, worry about them, play with them, teach them, mourn them, and write about them with recognizable tenderness. Children have toys and games. They laugh, quarrel, become bored, test boundaries, and presumably discover creative ways of avoiding unpleasant chores. They are children, but the boundary between the child's world and the adult world is less protected than you may expect. A young child can perform simple household tasks: fetching, carrying, watching younger siblings, gathering small pieces of wood, helping with animals, assisting with food preparation. As strength and skill increase, responsibilities grow. On a farm, there is always work. Animals do not care that you are 8 years old. A cow requiring attention does not postpone the matter until you finish adolescence. Seasonal labor can involve much of the household: planting, harvesting, preserving food, tending livestock, repairing equipment, spinning, sewing, cleaning, carrying water, and processing crops create a constant demand for hands. Useful hands are useful hands. This does not mean every colonial child spends every waking moment laboring miserably. Household arrangements differ greatly, and historians reconstruct children's daily experiences from incomplete evidence. Wealthy urban children, rural farm children, apprentices, enslaved children, and indigenous children live very different lives. Still, the expectation of contribution arrives early. You follow an older child outside. Perhaps he's carrying wood. The pieces look heavy. Your modern instinct whispers that someone should be supervising. Someone probably is. They are supervising by giving him more wood. Ideas about discipline are different too. Many colonial parents believe strongly that children require moral training and obedience. Religious teachings can reinforce the idea that youthful impulses must be shaped through firm guidance. Corporal punishment is accepted more readily than in many modern households, though practice varies enormously. Not every parent is equally severe. Not every community agrees about proper discipline. Printed advice and personal diaries reveal debates about raising children. Affection, authority, education, and punishment. History rarely gives you the convenience of one universal parenting style. But obedience matters. The household is an economic unit as well as a family. A child's refusal to work can affect everyone. Education fits around these realities. Literacy rates vary according to colony. Gender, race, religion, wealth, and social position. New England's religious culture encourages literacy partly because reading scripture carries great importance. Other regions develop different educational structures. Some children attend schools, some receive instruction at home, some learn from tutors, others receive little formal education. School itself can look unfamiliar. You may enter a small room containing children of different ages studying together. Books are precious. Paper is not something to waste casually. Learning can involve memorization and recitation. Religious material often plays a central role. Writing may come later than reading because the skills are taught separately and writing materials cost money. There is no brightly decorated classroom filled with laminated motivational posters. Nobody reminds you that every mistake is part of your learning journey. The teacher may have a considerably less poetic interpretation. Yet colonial education can be demanding and intellectually serious. Children who receive substantial schooling may study reading, writing, arithmetic, classical languages, religion, and other subjects depending on their social destination. And that destination matters enormously. Education is not equally available. Gender shapes expectations. Boys are more likely to receive advanced formal schooling, particularly if families intend them for professions requiring classical education. Girls may learn reading and writing but are often directed more heavily toward domestic skills. Though practices differ by family and region, race and legal status create far harsher divisions. Enslaved children experience childhood within a system that treats human beings as property. Their labor can begin young. Families live under the threat of separation through sale or inheritance. Access to literacy may be restricted by owners or local circumstances. Though enslaved people pursue knowledge through formal and informal means where possible, the phrase colonial childhood therefore hides radically unequal experiences. One child learns Latin. Another learns how to manage livestock. Another spends long hours performing coerced labor. They may inhabit the same year and yet live inside almost different worlds. For many free boys, apprenticeship becomes an important bridge toward adulthood. Imagine being perhaps 12, 13, or 14 and leaving your parents' daily supervision to live in another household. You are bound to a master craftsman. The precise age and terms vary, but apprenticeship can last for years in exchange for labor and obedience. The apprentice is supposed to receive training, maintenance, and sometimes education according to the agreement. You might learn printing, carpentry, blacksmithing, shoemaking, coopering, tailoring, cabinet making, or another skilled trade. The master's authority extends beyond teaching you how to use tools. He may control much of your daily life, where you live, how you behave, when you work, sometimes what social activities are permitted. You are not simply attending vocational school. You have entered another household hierarchy. Apprentices sometimes run away. Newspapers carry notices describing runaway apprentices, servants, and enslaved people. Such advertisements reveal clothing, skills, personalities, relationships, and tensions that formal documents often hide. A runaway apprentice may be portrayed as troublesome by the master seeking his return. Perhaps he is. Perhaps the master is unbearable. Usually you hear only one side. That uncertainty follows historians constantly. The people with the power to write advertisements and contracts often control the surviving description. Children themselves leave fewer records. You have to listen for them indirectly, through court cases, school books, letters, household accounts, archaeological objects, tiny shoes, toys, broken dishes, apprenticeship agreements, and the occasional adult memory of childhood written decades later. Games provide some of the warmer traces. Children play with balls, hoops, dolls, spinning tops, marbles, simple handmade toys, and games requiring almost no equipment. They run, they chase one another, they invent entertainment from whatever surrounds them. A stick remains one of humanity's most durable pieces of children's technology. No batteries required. There are also celebrations, visits, storytelling, music, and seasonal activities. So do not imagine a childhood without joy. Imagine instead a childhood with fewer barriers protecting it from adult necessity. A child witnesses work, illness, birth, death, animals being slaughtered for food, arguments, economic anxiety, religious observance, political conversation, visitors arriving unexpectedly. There are fewer specialized spaces where adults disappear to perform the complicated business of keeping society alive. Remember how crowded the house is. Children hear things. They see things. They participate. By adolescence, many possess practical abilities that would surprise a modern adult. A teenage girl may understand food preservation, sewing, household production, childcare, and dairy work. A teenage boy trained in a trade may already produce valuable goods. Farm children know animals, seasons, tools, and local landscapes intimately. Competence arrives because necessity insists upon it. But competence should not be confused with independence. Parents, masters, guardians, employers, and community expectations exercise enormous authority over young people. You can perform adult labor while still possessing very little control over your own life. That is one of the quiet contradictions of 1740. Children grow capable early. Freedom comes much more slowly. The youngster you noticed earlier returns with another load of wood. He drops it near the hearth. No applause, no allowance, no sticker declaring excellent work. Someone simply tells him what needs doing next. He sighs. There it is, a sound connecting centuries. Then he heads outside again, and you follow toward the yard, where another feature of colonial life is waiting. A pig is wandering past the doorway. Nobody appears concerned. Apparently the pig has somewhere to be. The pig continues across the yard with the relaxed confidence of an animal that has never heard the phrase residential zoning. You watch it go. Nobody chases it immediately. Nobody calls animal control. Depending on where you are, the pig may belong exactly where it is. Animals occupy colonial spaces with an intimacy that feels unusual if you come from a modern city where meat arrives wrapped in plastic, and horses appear mainly at racetracks, farms, or carefully organized tourist attractions. Here, animals are part of the machinery of everyday life. They provide food, transport, power, leather, wool, tallow, manure, income, and quite frequently, inconvenience. Start with the horse. You cannot understand transportation in 1740 without appreciating how much society depends upon animal muscle. Horses carry riders. They pull vehicles. They transport goods. They assist agricultural work. They connect farms, towns, markets, taverns, ports, and neighbouring communities. Owning a horse can therefore represent mobility and economic value. But a horse is not a vehicle that you park and forget. It eats when you're busy. It eats when you're sleeping. It eats when you would personally prefer that your transportation budget stop eating. It requires water, shelter, grooming, equipment, and care. Harnesses need maintenance. Shoes may require attention. Animals become injured or ill. Travel plans can change because a living creature has decided not to cooperate. Your transportation possesses opinions and teeth. In urban areas, horses also produce something modern paintings tend to omit: waste, a great deal of it. The larger and busier colonial towns concentrate people, animals, carts, markets, workshops, and household refuse into relatively compact spaces. Streets are not pristine corridors. Mud combines with manure. Rain rearranges everything. Summer heat improves nothing. You begin appreciating why respectable people pay attention to footwear. Then there are pigs. Pigs are extraordinarily useful animals because they convert a wide range of food scraps and forage into valuable meat and fat. They can be raised with fewer resources than some larger livestock and fit well into household economies. They can also wander. In colonial towns, regulations concerning roaming livestock appear precisely because animals and human settlements overlap. Local authorities may attempt to control where pigs, cattle, or other animals can go. But rules and enforcement vary. The existence of repeated regulations tells you something. Someone's pig has definitely been causing trouble. Perhaps several pigs. They forage through places you would not associate with food production. They root through refuse. They disturb property. They contribute manure. They occasionally become everybody's problem. Yet allowing animals access to common spaces can make economic sense, especially for households that cannot afford extensive private pasture or feed. The colonial street is therefore not simply a transportation route. It can become part road, part marketplace, part workplace, part drainage channel, and occasionally part buffet for a determined pig. Chickens are even easier to keep close. You hear them scratching around yards and buildings, searching for food with the intense concentration of creatures convinced that the next patch of dirt contains treasure. Eggs are useful. Chicken meat is useful. Feathers have uses, and chickens require less space than cattle. Their presence around homes feels ordinary. Roosters, unfortunately, possess no respect for your sleep schedule. You already met one this morning. He remains proud of his performance. Cattle shape the landscape differently. Cows provide milk, which can become butter and cheese. Cattle provide meat and hides. Oxen offer powerful traction for heavy work. Dairy production demands routine. Milk does not wait politely until the household feels energetic. Someone must attend to the animal. Someone processes the milk. Someone churns butter. Someone makes cheese. Someone cleans the equipment. Once again, the peaceful pastoral image contains hidden labor. You see a cow. A colonial householder sees food, fertilizer, wealth, work, risk, and tomorrow morning's responsibilities. Sheep provide wool, another foundation of household production. Wool can be cleaned, carded, spun, dyed, woven, knitted, and transformed into clothing or household textiles. The sheep standing quietly nearby therefore represents many hours of future work. Colonial families understand objects through their origins in a way modern consumers often do not. A wool stocking begins with an animal you can actually see. Leather shoes begin with hides. Candles may begin with animal fat. Feather bedding begins with birds. Dinner may currently be walking round outside. There is little psychological distance between animal and product. That does not mean people lack affection for animals. Horses can be admired. Dogs can be companions as well as working animals. Cats help control rodents and may also become household favourites. People name animals, complain about them, value them, mourn them, and sometimes describe individual personalities. But the modern idea of the pet as a family member existing almost entirely for emotional companionship is not the only model. Animals generally have jobs. Dogs guard property, assist hunting, manage livestock, or provide companionship alongside practical roles. Cats hunt mice and rats. Horses move people. Even seemingly decorative animals can signal wealth or status. You enter a household and notice a cat near stored food. That cat is not merely looking picturesque. Rodents are serious competitors. Food stores attract mice and rats. Grain represents months of work and future survival, so losing it to pests is more than irritating. The cat is employed. Payment appears to consist mainly of scraps and permission to remain a cat. There are wilder animals nearby too. The 18th century North American environment supports ecosystems far richer and more extensive than those familiar around many modern cities. Deer, wolves, bears, foxes, beavers, wild turkeys, and countless smaller creatures occupy landscapes shaped increasingly by colonial settlement, but not yet transformed to modern levels. Exactly which animals you encounter depends entirely on region. Colonial America stretches across environments too diverse for one tidy picture, and those environments are not empty wilderness before Europeans arrive. Indigenous peoples have shaped landscapes through hunting, agriculture, controlled burning, settlement, travel networks, and resource management for generations. European livestock introduces new pressures. Free-ranging pigs can damage indigenous crops. Cattle consume vegetation. Grazing changes plant communities. Animals therefore become participants in colonial expansion. A wandering pig may look harmless. To a neighbouring farmer whose crops it destroys, it is not harmless at all. Property disputes involving animals become inevitable. Fences matter. Marks identifying livestock matter. Local rules matter. If your cow wanders into someone else's field and eats something valuable, philosophical discussions about community harmony suddenly become very practical. You walk farther. A horse passes carrying a rider. A cart creaks behind another. Chickens scatter. A dog barks from a doorway. Flies gather wherever animals leave waste. The soundscape is alive with hooves, bells, barking, squealing, clucking, human shouting, and wooden wheels. The smellscape is equally committed, and you begin to understand that animals are not located somewhere outside colonial society. They are inside it. They occupy roads, yards, markets, barns, fields, sometimes houses. They shape working hours, diets, clothing, transportation, property law, landscapes, and even the cleanliness of streets. The pig from earlier finally stops beside a suspicious pile of household refuse. It begins investigating. You consider warning someone. Nobody seems interested. Perhaps the pig is performing a public service by eating scraps. Perhaps it is making sanitation worse. Quite possibly both. That ambiguity is wonderfully colonial. You step around it carefully and continue toward the busier street. The ground beneath your shoes is muddy. A shallow channel runs beside the roadway. Someone has thrown something unpleasant into it. And suddenly you realize the animals may not be the strangest thing waiting outside. The street itself is. You place your next step carefully. That becomes an unexpectedly useful skill in a colonial town. The street before you is not merely a road. It is a shared working surface where people walk, horses travel, carts unload, merchants conduct business, animals leave evidence of their passing, rainwater gathers, and household waste occasionally appears where your modern instincts strongly suggest it should not. The exact conditions depend heavily on location. A major commercial town such as Boston, Philadelphia, New York, or Charleston presents different challenges from a small settlement or rural road. Some streets are paved or improved, others remain dirt. Drainage systems vary. Local governments issue regulations concerning cleanliness, obstructions, animals, markets, and refuse. So resist the tempting picture of every colonial street as an open sewer. That exaggeration replaces history with a particularly smelly cartoon, but also resist imagining anything remotely like modern municipal sanitation. You walk forward. The road surface may be uneven. Rain transforms dirt into mud. Wheels carve ruts. Horses and livestock contribute manure. Household activities add organic waste. Workshops produce scraps related to their trades. Now sunshine arrives. The mud begins drying. Dust rises. Apparently the street has two principal personalities: wet inconvenience and airborne inconvenience. Your shoes suffer under both. People attempt to manage these conditions because 18th century colonists are perfectly capable of finding filth unpleasant. Town governments can require residents to clean areas near their properties, or prohibits certain dumping practices. Rules appear because cleanliness matters. Rules also appear because people keep doing the thing being prohibited. This is one of history's more reliable principles. If an old law repeatedly tells residents not to throw something somewhere, you can be reasonably confident that somebody has been enthusiastically throwing it there. You notice a shallow gutter. It carries rainwater and whatever else the water collects. Formal underground sewer systems of the modern sort do not serve your neighbourhood. Drainage is largely visible, local, and vulnerable to blockage. Wastewater from household activities must go somewhere. Remember the basin from your morning wash. There is no magical disappearance after you finish with it. Water used for washing dishes, cleaning clothes, preparing food, or personal hygiene may be emptied outdoors or into designated drainage areas depending on household and community arrangements. The principle remains simple. You carry clean water in. You carry dirty water out. That creates work. It also keeps the consequences of daily life physically close. Then there is human waste. Privies are common solutions. A privy may stand behind the house over a pit or vault. More elaborate arrangements exist in wealthier settings, while poorer or more temporary households improvise. Chamber pots serve nighttime convenience. Their contents eventually require disposal. Where and how this happens varies, and sensational descriptions of people casually throwing waste from every window should be treated cautiously. Yes, improper disposal happens. Yes, streets and gutters can become contaminated. No, every morning does not necessarily begin with residents cheerfully launching chamber pots at pedestrians. That would make hats considerably more important. Still, sanitation depends on human behaviour and local enforcement rather than a vast sealed network of pipes. Privy pits require attention. Waste accumulates. In dense urban neighbourhoods, contaminated wells and water sources can become serious hazards. Although nobody yet understands microorganisms as the cause of infectious disease, people do recognise that foul smells, stagnant water, decay, and sickness seem connected. The dominant explanations are different. Bad air, often described through ideas later associated with miasma, is commonly feared. Medical theories surrounding environment and disease evolve throughout the century, and there is disagreement among practitioners. The germ theory that eventually transforms sanitation lies in the future. Yet you do not need a microscope to decide that a rotting pile beside your doorway is unpleasant. So households sweep, residents clean, authorities regulate, people complain, and still the town smells stronger than you expect. You pass a butcher's working area. Animal processing produces blood, bones, offal, hides, fat, and other materials that must be used or discarded. Many of these things are valuable. Fat becomes tallow, hides become leather, bones have users. Nothing should be wasted casually when useful material represents money, but not everything finds immediate use. Trades that process animal products can create intense smells. Tanning is particularly notorious. Transforming hides into durable leather requires unpleasant substances and lengthy treatment. Tanneries are therefore not the sort of establishments you would request beside your outdoor breakfast table. Other trades contribute their own atmosphere. Breweries, stables, fish markets, slaughtering areas, soap making, blacksmith shops, bakeries. Each produces smells, smoke, noise, heat, scraps, or wastewater. The colonial town is not zoned into neat districts where all unpleasant production happens invisibly beyond residential life. Work occurs close to homes, sometimes inside them. An artisan may operate a shop attached to his dwelling. Apprentices live with masters. Customers arrive. Deliveries appear. Hammering begins early. Your neighbour's occupation becomes part of your acoustic environment. Imagine living beside a cooper. Barrels are essential containers in Atlantic commerce, so this is useful work. It is also work involving repeated striking. Sleep peacefully. The cooper has opinions about that. Markets add another layer. On market days, farmers and sellers bring meat, vegetables, grain, dairy products, poultry, and other goods into concentrated public spaces. Crowds gather, animals arrive alive, food scraps accumulate, dogs investigate, pigs may investigate more efficiently, flies consider the entire arrangement excellent, markets can be regulated carefully because authorities understand that spoiled food. Dishonest measurements, obstructed streets, and unmanaged waste cause problems. Officials may inspect goods or enforce market rules, but enforcement is never perfect. You therefore use your senses. Does the meat look sound? Does the fish smell suspicious? Is the milk fresh? There are no printed expiration dates, no refrigerated display case, no tiny label explaining that the product should be consumed within 3 days. You negotiate freshness directly with reality. The street is also a workplace for people. Porters carry loads, vendors sell goods, craftsmen move materials, sailors and dock workers crowd port districts, servants run errands, enslaved people perform domestic, commercial, and skilled labour, particularly in colonies and towns where slavery is deeply embedded in the local economy. Children weave through all of this. Nobody has created a protected pedestrian lane for them. A cart approaches. You move aside. The wheels pass close enough to encourage immediate respect. Traffic rules exist in various forms, but the basic survival strategy remains awareness. You listen for hooves. You watch wheels. You avoid animals. You avoid holes. You avoid whatever is flowing through that gutter. Walking becomes surprisingly athletic. Then rain begins, only lightly. Dust darkens. Smells rise from the street. Wood smoke drifts between buildings. Somewhere bread is baking, producing a warm, comforting scent that briefly defeats everything else. Then the wind changes. The stable winds. You begin understanding why 18th century urban life can be both lively and exhausting. Everything happens openly. Commerce, transport, waste disposal, food production, craft work, animal movement, conversation, arguments, announcements, children playing, people gossiping from doorways. Privacy was difficult inside the house. It is nearly impossible outside. And because people share this physical environment so intensely, reputation matters. Someone sees where you go. Someone notices whom you speak with. Someone knows whether your household keeps its frontage clean. Someone notices if your animals escape repeatedly. Someone definitely notices if you empty something unpleasant in the wrong place. The colonial street functions almost like a community notice board, except the notice board contains horses. You continue carefully, learning to read the ground ahead. A dry patch, a puddle, a rut, a suspicious object, a chicken, another puddle. You're becoming quite skilled. Then a bell sounds somewhere farther along the street. A person nearby is coughing. Another mentions a fever that has been troubling a neighbouring household. Your thoughts return to those open drains, crowded rooms, shared water sources, insects, animals, and the absence of germ theory. You wonder what happens when illness arrives. Fortunately, colonial medicine has an answer. Several answers, actually. Some involve herbs, some involve prayer, some involve purging, and one of the most respected options may involve deliberately removing some of your blood. Suddenly the muddy street feels comparatively welcoming. The cough you heard in the street follows you indoors, where someone has already begun discussing what should be done about it. This is the moment when you discover that becoming ill in 1740 can be frightening for two separate reasons. First, you have the illness. Second, somebody may decide to treat you. The joke is easy, but the reality deserves a little sympathy. Colonial healers are not foolish people randomly inventing ways to make patients miserable. They work within medical traditions developed over centuries, using observation, inherited theory, practical experience, botanical knowledge, and treatments that sometimes genuinely help. The problem is that they do not yet possess many of the scientific tools that allow modern medicine to identify what is actually happening inside your body. No germ theory, no antibiotics, no laboratory blood tests, no modern medical imaging, no reliable understanding of many infectious diseases. A fever is something you can observe. Its microscopic cause remains invisible. So the healer interprets signs, your pulse, your skin, your appetite, your bowel movements, your sleep, your pain. The appearance of bodily fluids may attract considerable attention. You begin wishing you had never mentioned feeling unwell. Medical thinking remains influenced by humoral traditions inherited from ancient Greek and Roman medicine. The body is often understood through balances involving blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Though medical theory in the 18th century is changing and physicians do not all think identically, that disagreement matters. There is no single treatment manual followed everywhere. One practitioner may emphasize traditional balancing, another may favor newer mechanical or chemical theories, another relies heavily on personal experience. A household healer may ignore most formal theory and simply use whatever remedy has worked before. You're surrounded by competing expertise. Again, suspiciously modern. One famous treatment is bloodletting, if illness appears connected to excessive or disordered blood. Removing some can seem logical within prevailing medical frameworks. A vein may be opened with a lancet. Blood flows into a bowl. The amount removed varies. You watch it and wonder whether weakness was really the symptom that needed assistance. Bloodletting does sometimes have legitimate uses in specific medical conditions, but its historical application is far broader than modern evidence would support. For an already weakened patient, removing blood can make matters worse, yet the practice remains respectable. Educated physicians use it. Patients may expect it. That is one of the unsettling lessons of medical history. A treatment can be mainstream, sophisticated, and sincerely defended by intelligent people while still being harmful in circumstances they do not understand. If bloodletting is not selected, perhaps purging will be. The logic again concerns removing or correcting harmful material within the body. Laxatives and emetics are used to empty the digestive system. Some preparations are mild, others are not. Imagine suffering from fever, dehydration, and weakness. Now imagine your treatment is aggressive diarrhea. History wishes you a speedy recovery. Mercury compounds also appear in 18th century medicine for various conditions. Mercury-based treatments become particularly notorious in later medical practice because the substance is toxic. But practitioners do not possess modern toxicology. They observe effects. Salivation, for example, can be interpreted as evidence that a medicine is acting. Unfortunately, the medicine is definitely doing something is not identical to the medicine is helping. Other treatments are gentler. Herbal remedies remain central. Plants can be prepared as teas, infusions, syrups, poultices, salves, or other forms. Some are soothing. Some contain compounds with genuine physiological effects. Willow preparations, for example, belong to a long history of plant-based approaches to pain and fever. Although historical usage and preparation differ from modern standardized medication, other herbs may help digestion or ease minor symptoms. Then there are remedies whose benefits are uncertain, and remedies whose primary contribution is giving everyone something to do while the patient recovers naturally. Rest itself can be effective. Warmth can help. Fluids can help. Nutritious food can help. Careful nursing can matter enormously. The person keeping you comfortable may sometimes do more good than the person arriving with impressive instruments. Professional physicians are not always available. They are concentrated more heavily among towns and wealthier communities. Training varies. Some study through apprenticeship. Others receive formal medical education, perhaps in Europe. Because medical institutions in the colonies remain limited in 1740, surgeons occupy another part of the medical world. Surgeries performed without modern anesthesia or antiseptic technique. Operations therefore tend to be limited to situations where intervention seems necessary enough to justify tremendous pain and danger. Speed is valuable. A surgeon who works quickly is appreciated. You would prefer not to discover exactly how quickly. For ordinary families, household medicine remains crucial. Women often serve as the first line of medical care. A mother, wife, neighbor, experienced older woman, or local healer may possess extensive knowledge of remedies and nursing. Midwives occupy especially important positions. Childbirth usually occurs at home. A midwife brings practical experience accumulated across many deliveries. She may monitor labour, assist the mother, advise family members, and care for the newborn. Male physicians become increasingly involved in childbirth among some wealthy families as the century progresses, but midwives remain central to reproductive care. Their knowledge is practical rather than necessarily academic. They have seen births, many births. That experience matters in a world where complications can become deadly quickly. Colonial medicine also develops through cultural exchange. Although the relationships behind that exchange are often unequal, indigenous peoples possess sophisticated knowledge of local plants and their uses. Colonists learn about unfamiliar North American species through indigenous knowledge, direct experimentation, and adaptation. African medical traditions travel across the Atlantic with enslaved people. Enslaved healers may preserve botanical, spiritual, and practical knowledge despite living under coercion. These traditions interact with European practices in complicated ways. Sometimes colonists adopt remedies. Sometimes they dismiss them. Sometimes they fear the people who possess knowledge they do not understand. Written records often preserve the European observer more clearly than the indigenous or African healer who provided the information, so historians must reconstruct these exchanges carefully. You lie back while someone places a cool cloth against your forehead. This feels reassuring. Then another person suggests a powerful purge. Less reassuring. A third recommends prayer. For many colonists, religious belief and medical treatment are not opposites. Illness can have spiritual meaning while still requiring practical care. People pray and administer medicine. They call physicians and ministers. They seek natural explanations while also interpreting events through providence. The boundaries your modern mind creates between science, religion, and folk practice are much less tidy here. Then there are epidemics. Smallpox is among the most feared. The disease can spread rapidly and kill significant numbers of people, while survivors may carry permanent scars. By 1740, inoculation against smallpox is known in British North America, especially after intense controversy earlier in the century. The procedure involves deliberately introducing material from a smallpox case into a healthy person in hopes of producing a controlled infection and later immunity. It is dangerous. It can cause disease. An inoculated person can also spread smallpox while infectious. But compared with naturally acquired smallpox, inoculation can substantially reduce the risk of death. The practice sparks fierce debate. Supporters point toward evidence. Opponents fear the procedure, question its safety, or object on religious and social grounds. Here you encounter something unexpectedly recognizable. A medical innovation, statistics, public anxiety, religious arguments, people accusing one another of recklessness. Apparently, 1740 has invented the comment section without needing the internet. Eventually your imaginary fever passes. Perhaps the herbs helped. Perhaps rest helped. Perhaps your immune system did most of the work. Perhaps the physician proudly takes credit anyway. You sit upright. You are alive. That alone counts as a successful outcome, because in the colonial world, death is not hidden behind hospital doors and professional institutions. It happens at home. Children see it. Families prepare bodies. Neighbors gather. Funerals move through familiar streets. And as you recover beside the fading fire, you begin to realize that the next strange thing about 1740 is not how people die. It is how closely the living are expected to stand beside death. Death does not arrive from some distant institution. It enters the same rooms where people eat, sleep, argue, work, give birth, and recover from ordinary illnesses. That closeness changes the atmosphere of 1740 in ways that can be difficult to imagine from a modern world where death is frequently managed by hospitals. Funeral homes, medical professionals, and specialized institutions. Here, the household remains at the center. If a relative becomes seriously ill, the family may gather nearby. Neighbors visit, someone tends the fire, someone prepares food, someone changes linen, someone sits beside the bed through the night. A physician may come if one is available and affordable. A minister may be summoned. Household remedies continue. Advice arrives from every direction, because nothing encourages confident opinions quite like someone else's illness. You wait. Sometimes the patient improves. Sometimes the room becomes quiet. Death is common enough to be familiar. But familiarity does not mean indifference. Colonial letters and diaries can contain intense grief. Parents mourn children. Husbands mourn wives. Wives mourn husbands. Friends describe losses that remain painful years later. One of the most misleading stereotypes about earlier societies is that high mortality somehow makes people emotionally accustomed to losing those they love. Human attachment does not work so conveniently. If anything, uncertainty can make relationships feel painfully fragile. Child mortality is especially significant. Exact rates vary by region, community, disease environment, and period. But many families experience the deaths of infants or young children. A mother may endure several pregnancies knowing from experience that not every child will survive. Parents still name children. They care for them. They pray for them. They record birthdays and deaths. They grieve. Sometimes a later child receives the name of a deceased sibling. A practice that can seem unsettling to you but reflects different naming traditions and family strategies for preserving important names. Adults face serious risks too. Childbirth can become dangerous. Infections can turn fatal. Accidents involving animals, tools, fire, water, or transportation can kill. Diseases that modern medicine treats routinely may become life-threatening. And epidemics can transform an entire community's relationship with mortality in a matter of weeks. Smallpox, measles, dysentery, various fevers. The terminology found in 18th century records does not always map neatly onto modern diagnoses, which creates uncertainty for historians trying to identify exactly what killed people. A written cause such as fever describes a symptom more clearly than a pathogen. Other terms can be even less precise. You therefore have to resist diagnosing every historical death from a few words in a record. The dead themselves rarely provide enough evidence to settle the matter. When someone dies at home, practical responsibilities begin almost immediately. There is no telephone number to call, so strangers can quietly remove every difficult task. Family members and neighbours may prepare the body. The eyes are closed. The body is washed. It can be dressed or wrapped appropriately. Customs differ according to region, religion, status, ethnicity, and family tradition. Women frequently participate heavily in these duties. Death becomes another form of household labour. That sounds cold until you imagine the alternative. The person being prepared is someone you know, someone whose hands you recognise, someone who sat at the breakfast table. Care does not necessarily end when breathing does. You remain physically close during the final act of family responsibility. The body cannot wait indefinitely. Modern embalming practices are not part of ordinary colonial funerals in 1740. Without refrigeration, burial generally occurs relatively quickly. Climate matters. A warm summer accelerates decomposition. Winter can create different problems if the ground freezes deeply enough to complicate burial. Coffins are used, although styles and practices vary. A local carpenter or joiner may construct one. Notice the strange transformation. Yesterday the carpenter made furniture. Today he measures for a coffin. Specialization exists. But the modern funeral industry has not yet developed into the system you know. The community supplies much of what is needed. News spreads. A bell may announce a death in some communities. Neighbours gather. Relatives travel if distance allows. Funeral customs differ considerably among Puritans, Anglicans, Quakers, German-speaking communities, Dutch traditions, Catholics where present, Jewish communities, African populations, indigenous peoples, and others living within or alongside colonial society. There is no universal colonial funeral. Even within one religious tradition, customs change over time. Some communities distrust elaborate mourning as excessive. Others gradually embrace more visible funeral display. By the 18th century, funerals can become important social events, particularly among prosperous families. Food and drink may be provided. Sometimes substantial amounts of alcohol appear. Yes, alcohol again. Apparently even death cannot escape the colonial beverage cabinet. Funeral hospitality serves practical and social purposes. People may have travelled significant distances. Gathering reinforces community ties. But display can also communicate status. A wealthy funeral announces wealth even while reminding everyone that wealth cannot prevent death. Special mourning clothing, gloves, rings, scarves, or other items may appear depending on time and place. Funeral expenses can become considerable. Authorities and religious critics sometimes worry about extravagance. Human beings have apparently discovered a way to compete socially at the grave. The burial ground itself may be close to everyday life. Churchyards place graves beside houses of worship. Family burial grounds can exist on farms or plantations. Some towns establish separate cemeteries. You may walk past graves regularly. Children may play nearby. People attend worship with generations of the dead lying just outside. The cemetery is not necessarily isolated behind distant gates. Death occupies community geography. Gravestones reinforce the message. In parts of New England, carved stones famously display skulls, winged death's heads, hourglasses, and later cherubic imagery. These designs change over time and region, and they should not be treated as universal across the colonies. Still, the symbolism can feel startling. A skull looks directly at you. The message is not subtle. You will die. Please plan accordingly. Modern memorial design often softens death through flowers, peaceful landscapes, polished stone, and gentle language. Colonial imagery can be considerably more direct. Remember death. Prepare your soul. Time is passing. The theological meaning varies, but mortality is not something to disguise. You stand beside a fresh grave. Earth strikes the coffin. The sound is small, heavy, final. People around you understand it immediately. Some cry openly. Others remain composed. Children watch. Nobody ushers them into a separate, brightly decorated room to protect them from the concept of mortality. They have probably encountered it before. This exposure may shape religious education too. Parents and ministers teach children about salvation, judgment, heaven, and the uncertainty of life. To modern ears, some surviving texts written for children can sound remarkably severe, but they emerge from a world where a child might genuinely lose a sibling, parent, or friend without warning. Mortality is not an abstract philosophical subject. It sleeps in the next room. For enslaved families, death carries additional layers of injustice. Enslaved people create mourning traditions and maintain community bonds under conditions where owners may control movement, time, burial arrangements, and family relationships. African cultural practices influence funeral and burial traditions in different regions, sometimes blending with Christianity and local customs. Archaeology has become especially important in recovering these histories because written documents produced by slaveholders often fail to preserve the emotional and cultural worlds of enslaved communities. Objects buried with individuals, grave orientation, burial locations, skeletal evidence, and community traditions can reveal fragments unavailable in official records. Again, the historical archive speaks unevenly. Some people leave portraits and elaborate stones, others leave almost no written words. Yet grief existed in both households. As evening approaches, you leave the burial ground. The living return to ordinary responsibilities remarkably quickly because animals still need feeding, meals still need preparing, fires still need tending, and children still require care. That may be the deepest difference you feel. Death interrupts life, but it does not suspend the machinery of survival. Tomorrow morning, someone will rise from that crowded bed. Someone will carry water. Someone will make bread. Someone will walk past the grave. And slowly, daily routine will close around the absence. You return toward town, where another crowd has gathered. At first you assume another funeral is taking place. Then you notice the wooden structure. The stocks. People are watching. Some appear amused. And you realize this gathering concerns a very different kind of public ritual. In 1740, the community does not always hide punishment behind prison walls. Sometimes punishment works precisely because everyone gets to watch. You move closer to the gathering and immediately understand why the punishment has been placed here rather than hidden behind a wall. Visibility is the point. The stocks stand in a public place where neighbours, merchants, children, travellers, servants, labourers, and anyone else passing through can see exactly who has offended community standards. A person confined there is not merely uncomfortable. He is exposed. His name acquires a story. In a society where reputation can determine credit, employment, marriage prospects, business relationships, and social acceptance. Humiliation carries practical consequences. Colonial punishment therefore often works through the community. There are jails, certainly, but long-term imprisonment is not yet the dominant punishment it becomes in later American history. Local jails commonly hold people awaiting trial, debtors in some circumstances, suspects, or individuals temporarily confined. Keeping large numbers of prisoners locked away for years is expensive. Someone has to construct the building, guard it, feed the prisoners, maintain it. Colonial authorities often prefer punishments that are quicker, cheaper, and extremely visible. The stocks accomplish all three. A person's legs may be secured between wooden boards, leaving the offender sitting helplessly in public. The pillory is different. Though the two are often confused in modern conversation, a pillory generally restrains the head and hands, forcing the offender to stand exposed. Both transform embarrassment into official policy. You watch people passing. Some stare, some laugh. Perhaps someone offers an insult. The punishment depends partly upon this audience. Without witnesses, public shame loses much of its power. Yet do not imagine every crowd behaving like a festival audience. Reactions depend on the offence, the individual, local relationships, and community sympathy. A popular person punished under an unpopular law may receive support. A notorious offender may receive considerably less kindness. Public opinion becomes an unofficial part of the sentence. The crimes punished this way vary across colonies and courts. Theft, fraud, disorderly conduct, sexual offences, religious violations in certain times and places, defamation, other breaches of law or community expectations. Colonial legal systems are not uniform. Each colony develops laws within its own political, religious, and economic circumstances while drawing heavily upon English legal traditions. So a punishment common in one place may be rare somewhere else. Then you notice another structure nearby, a whipping post. This is where the atmosphere becomes less amusing. Corporal punishment is an accepted part of many colonial legal systems. Courts may order whipping for various offences, though severity and frequency vary. The punishment is painful, public, immediate, and deliberately memorable. You do not need graphic detail to understand its purpose. The authorities want the offender to remember. They also want you to remember. Punishment communicates. This is what happens when rules are broken. Public discipline therefore becomes a kind of civic theatre, but theatre with very real suffering. Fines provide another option. If you have money, a financial penalty can punish you without physically harming you. If you do not have money, matters become more complicated. Economic inequality affects encounters with justice just as it affects food, medicine, clothing, and housing. A fine that inconveniences a wealthy merchant may devastate a poor labourer. Colonial courts recognize social rank even when legal principles claim broader order. Status follows you into the courtroom. Race and legal condition matter even more. Enslaved people live under separate and harsher systems of control in many colonies. Slave codes restrict movement, assembly, economic activity, and other aspects of life, with punishments that can be brutally severe. The purpose is not simply ordinary criminal justice, it is maintaining slavery. That distinction matters. A free colonist punished in the stocks remains legally a person with recognized rights. An enslaved person, is trapped within a system that treats human beings as property and uses violence as a routine mechanism of control. The phrase colonial justice therefore contains profoundly unequal realities. Women encounter another set of expectations. Colonial law is heavily shaped by gender. Married women's legal identities are constrained under English common law traditions. Although property rules and actual practices vary by colony and circumstance, sexual behaviour is also policed unequally. Women can face serious reputational consequences for conduct that communities interpret through moral and religious standards. Men are hardly immune to prosecution for sexual offences, but consequences often fall differently because pregnancy can make women's behaviour publicly visible in ways men's behaviour is not. Courts become places where private life turns public. Imagine standing before neighbours while intimate details of your relationships are discussed. There is no online privacy to lose. You never had much privacy in the first place. Remember the crowded house, the shared bed, the neighbours who notice your movements, the servants who hear conversations. Now add a court system that can question witnesses about behaviour. Colonial communities are remarkably good at knowing things about one another. Another punishment makes this explicit: public confession or acknowledgement. In religious communities, offenders may sometimes be expected to admit wrongdoing before others. The precise practice changes according to denomination, period, and offence. But the principle is powerful. You do not simply pay. You declare that you were wrong before people you must continue seeing afterward. For many people, that may be worse than the fine. Then there are punishments involving signs or written labels identifying an offence. Branding and other permanent bodily punishments also exist for certain serious crimes in some jurisdictions. Capital punishment remains available for offences considered especially grave, although actual practice varies, and legal codes can list more capital crimes than are consistently punished by execution. Colonial justice contains discretion, judges, juries, governors, community reputation, petitions, all can affect outcomes. Mercy exists alongside severity. That is important because old legal codes can create a misleading picture if you assume every maximum punishment is routinely imposed. A law tells you what authorities permit. Court records tell you more about what they actually do. Even then, surviving records are incomplete. You continue toward the courthouse. Inside, proceedings may feel both familiar and strange. There are accusations, witnesses, juries, arguments over evidence, property disputes, debt cases, assault allegations, inheritance conflicts, neighbours suing neighbours. The grand drama of colonial law is often surprisingly ordinary. Someone owes someone money. Someone's animal damaged someone else's property. Someone insulted someone. Someone refuses to honour an agreement. Apparently human civilization has achieved remarkable consistency. Courts are central because formal government reaches daily life through these disputes. But informal pressure may be equally important. You do not always need a judge to enforce behaviour. Gossip works beautifully. Church discipline works. Family authority works. Economic dependence works. If a merchant believes you're dishonest, credit disappears. If neighbours consider you unreliable, cooperation becomes difficult. If your reputation collapses, the consequences spread beyond one legal sentence. This helps explain why public punishment carries such force. You cannot disappear easily into a city of millions. Your community remembers. The man in the stocks will eventually be released, but tomorrow people will still know where he spent today. Children may remember. Potential employers may remember. People at the tavern will definitely remember. And because taverns are information exchanges as much as drinking establishments, the story may travel farther than he would prefer. You watch as a passerby stops before the stocks. There is a brief conversation, perhaps a joke. The restrained man does not look amused. You decide not to stare. Walking away feels polite. Yet even as you leave the crowd, you realize something uncomfortable. You know who was punished. You know roughly why. You know where it happened. Without intending to participate, you have become part of the mechanism. Public punishment works because the community watches, and you watched. As you return toward the houses, another thought follows. If everyone notices punishment, everyone must also notice behavior before punishment occurs. Who visits whom? Who drinks too much? Who quarrels? Who misses church? Who owes money? Who returns home late? In a world of crowded rooms and observant neighbours, privacy begins to seem almost fictional. You enter the house and hear two people discussing a letter that has just arrived. One of them begins reading it aloud. The letter is not addressed to either of them. Apparently your education in colonial privacy is not finished yet. You hesitate in the doorway as the letter continues being read aloud. Nobody lowers their voice. Nobody looks embarrassed. The recipient is not even present. To your modern instincts, this feels dangerously close to opening someone's messages and passing the phone around the room. But in 1740, written communication lives within a different culture of privacy. Letters can certainly be confidential. People understand secrecy and may explicitly request discretion. Political correspondence, business matters, romantic exchanges, and family concerns can all contain information intended for limited eyes. Yet letters are also social objects. They may be shared, read aloud, copied, passed between relatives. News contained in one person's correspondence can quickly become useful information for an entire household or community. Literacy itself helps explain part of this behavior. Not everyone reads equally well. Someone who receives a letter may need another person to read it. Someone who wants to send one may rely upon another person to write it. Immediately, private correspondence can involve several human beings before it has travelled 20 feet. Then the letter begins its journey. There is no sealed digital network delivering it invisibly. Someone physically carries it. Postal systems exist and are developing, especially along major routes, but service can be slow and irregular by modern standards. Letters may travel with official post riders, ship captains, merchants, friends, neighbours, or anyone heading conveniently in the right direction. You hand your personal thoughts to another human being. Then you hope. Perhaps the letter arrives. Perhaps it is delayed. Perhaps it gets wet. Perhaps the person carrying it forgets. Perhaps somebody becomes curious. Wax seals can discourage casual opening and reveal tampering. But a seal is not encryption. Privacy depends heavily upon trust. The same is true inside the home. Remember your sleeping arrangements. Walls do not always separate people neatly. Rooms may serve multiple purposes, and servants, apprentices, children, relatives, boarders, guests, and enslaved workers can all occupy overlapping domestic spaces. You want to have a private argument? Good luck. Someone is probably polishing something nearby. A prosperous house provides more opportunities for separation. But greater wealth can also mean more servants. Privacy increases architecturally while decreasing socially. A curious bargain. Servants present an especially interesting problem for elite households. A servant is expected to be present when needed and socially invisible when convenient. This is impossible, of course. The servant has ears. The servant has memory. The servant may know who visits, what the family eats, when the master returns home, whether the couple quarrels, which child is sick, and how much wine disappeared last night. Enslaved domestic workers can possess similarly intimate knowledge of enslavers' households while being denied freedom within them. Surviving records occasionally reveal the anxiety this creates among slaveholders, who depend upon people they simultaneously exploit and distrust. Power does not eliminate dependence. It creates uncomfortable forms of it. Outside the household, neighbours become another information network. You walk down a street. Someone sees you. You enter a tavern. Someone sees you. You visit a particular house repeatedly. Someone definitely sees you. Urban anonymity exists to some extent, especially in growing ports. But colonial towns are still small by modern metropolitan standards. Rural communities can be even more interconnected. People know families. They know occupations. They know reputations. They know who owes money. Credit makes this particularly important. Much colonial commerce depends upon relationships of trust. Cash can be scarce. and people buy goods on credit or maintain accounts with merchants and neighbours. Your reputation, therefore, has monetary value. If people believe you pay debts reliably, doors remain open. If they believe you do not, life becomes more difficult. Gossip becomes a kind of unofficial credit report. There is no numerical score. There is Mrs. Thompson across the road, possibly more terrifying. Taverns accelerate the circulation of information. People arrive from other towns. Travellers bring stories. Merchants discuss prices. Newspapers circulate. Political news is debated. Rumours develop legs. Someone hears that a ship has arrived. Someone else hears that a merchant has failed. Another person claims to know why. By evening, the story has acquired 3 additional characters and a scandalous horse. Accuracy is optional. Speed is excellent. Printed newspapers are expanding the information world too. Though access varies, a newspaper may be read by several people rather than purchased individually by every reader. Copies appear in taverns, coffee houses, homes, shops, and other social spaces. People read items aloud. Information is communal because printed material costs money and literacy is uneven. The boundary between reading privately and consuming information socially remains fluid. Even personal behaviour can become public through churches. Congregations are not merely places where individuals worship anonymously for an hour before disappearing. Churches can structure community life, depending on denomination and colony. Religious authorities may monitor moral conduct, mediate disputes, discipline members, and shape reputation. Missing worship repeatedly can attract attention in communities where attendance is expected. So can drunkenness, sexual misconduct, public quarrels, theological disagreement. Your neighbours are not merely neighbours. Some are witnesses. Then there is the household itself. Children observe far more than adults might prefer. You remember how early they enter practical life. They carry messages, run errands, visit neighbours, work beside adults. They become accidental distributors of information. Ask a child not to mention something interesting, and you have created history's earliest guaranteed broadcasting service. Physical architecture contributes again. Glass windows exist, of course, but curtains and shutters vary by household. Houses sit close together in towns. Sounds travel through timber construction. Smoke escapes. Cooking smells escape. Arguments escape. You may know what your neighbour is eating without receiving an invitation. At night, artificial lighting creates another form of visibility. Candles cost money. Oil costs money. People often organise activities around daylight and the hearth. If a house remains brightly active unusually late, someone may notice. If a visitor leaves at a suspicious hour, someone may notice that too. Reputation grows from hundreds of tiny observations. None seems important alone. Together they create a social identity. This can feel suffocating. Yet communal visibility also has advantages. If you become sick, neighbours know. If a fire starts, people respond. If a child disappears, others recognise the child. If a traveller behaves suspiciously, word spreads. If your harvest fails or your household suffers disaster, community networks may provide assistance. The same social world that watches you can support you. Privacy and security trade places constantly. You cannot simply label colonial communities intrusive and modern communities liberated. Your own century watches through cameras, phones, websites, databases, and invisible software. 1740 watches through windows. At least Mrs. Thompson occasionally brings pie. You smile at the thought and turn back toward the letter. The reader has reached the end. Someone asks a question about a relative mentioned halfway through. Another person offers an opinion. The recipient will probably hear that opinion later. Perhaps the writer assumed exactly this would happen. Letters are often written with multiple possible readers in mind. The individual voice exists inside a social network. You begin to understand that privacy here is not absent. It is negotiated. You find it behind a closed door if you're fortunate enough to have one. Inside a sealed letter if everyone respects the seal. During a quiet walk. In whispered conversation. Perhaps behind bed curtains. Small islands of solitude surrounded by other people. And because information travels through conversation rather than silently through machines, Stories change as they move. A strange dream becomes an omen. An unexplained illness becomes a warning. A coincidence becomes evidence of providence. Someone remembers an old charm. Someone else insists such things are foolish. Then, just before evening, a neighbour mentions that a bird flew into a house yesterday. She looks worried. You ask why. Everyone else at the table seems to understand. Apparently a bird is not always merely a bird. And the rational, practical colonial world you have been exploring is about to reveal how comfortably Christian faith, folk belief, omens, dreams, and superstition can occupy the same room. The neighbour lowers her voice when she mentions the bird. That alone tells you the story matters. Perhaps the creature entered through an open door, chimney. Perhaps it panicked against the window before escaping. To you, this is a minor domestic disturbance involving feathers and poor navigation. To someone in 1740, it might carry another possibility. A sign. Exactly what kind of sign depends on who is interpreting it. This is where colonial belief becomes more complicated than the familiar picture of stern churchgoers living inside a purely religious world. Christian faith is central to life in many colonial communities, though denominations, practices, and levels of personal devotion vary enormously. Congregationalists, Anglicans, Quakers, Baptists, Presbyterians, Dutch Reformed communities, Lutherans, Catholics, Jewish communities, and others inhabit different parts of British North America. Their beliefs are not interchangeable, and beneath formal religion flows another current, folk belief. People inherit traditions from England, Scotland, Ireland, Germany, the Netherlands, Africa, and elsewhere. They also encounter indigenous traditions rooted in entirely different understandings of nature and spiritual power. These systems meet, conflict, overlap, and change. The result is not a tidy division between religion and superstition. A person can sincerely believe in Christian doctrine while also paying close attention to unusual dreams. Another might dismiss charms as foolish, but interpret an extraordinary event as divine providence. Someone else keeps an object intended to protect a household, while insisting there is nothing improper about doing so. Humans are remarkably good at maintaining several explanations at once. You sit beside the fire while people discuss the bird. One person says it means nothing. Another remembers hearing that an unexpected bird inside a house can precede misfortune. The precise folklore varies across time and place, so you should resist creating a universal colonial dictionary of omens. A bird does not mean the same thing everywhere. Neither does a dream. Neither does a strange noise at midnight. But unusual events invite interpretation. Imagine living without modern meteorology, microbiology, electrical lighting, instant communication, or easy access to scientific explanations. A sudden sickness enters your household. Why? A storm destroys one farm but spares another. Why? A child wakes screaming from a vivid dream. Why? A cow behaves strangely. What? Your world contains patterns whose mechanisms remain hidden. People search for meaning. Providence offers one powerful framework. Many colonists understand events as occurring under divine authority. Success, disaster, illness, weather, and unexpected deliverance can therefore invite religious reflection. A fortunate escape from danger may become evidence of God's protection. A catastrophe may prompt questions about divine judgment. That does not mean people never seek natural causes. The two explanations can coexist. A storm can have physical causes and spiritual meaning. To a modern mind trained to separate categories, this can feel strange. To your neighbours, perhaps your separation is strange. Dreams occupy similarly uncertain territory. Most dreams are probably treated as dreams. People in 1740 do not necessarily leap from bed every morning convinced that last night's appearance of a turnip contains a divine message. But extraordinary dreams can attract attention. Religious texts themselves contain meaningful dreams, making it difficult to dismiss the possibility entirely. Personal writings from the broader early modern period reveal people reflecting on dreams, warnings, coincidences, and unusual experiences. Some interpret them spiritually. Others remain skeptical. That disagreement is important. The colonial world is not uniformly credulous. Educated ministers can condemn popular superstitions. Authorities may criticize fortune-telling, magical practices, or charms. People mock beliefs they consider foolish, yet condemned practices can survive precisely because ordinary people continue using them. You may encounter protective objects, written charms, ritual practices, or folk remedies whose boundaries between medicine and magic are difficult to define. Herb placed beneath a pillow might be medicinal, protective, symbolic, or all three. A horseshoe placed in a particular location may carry meanings beyond its practical use, though specific customs should be traced carefully rather than projected backward from later folklore. Archaeologists occasionally find deliberately concealed objects inside old buildings. Shoes hidden in walls, pins, bottles, other unusual deposits. Interpreting them is difficult. Were they protective charms, construction traditions, personal keepsakes, accidental losses? Sometimes scholars disagree. That uncertainty is part of the fascination. An object survives. Its explanation does not. You stand inside the old house centuries later, metaphorically speaking, holding a worn shoe discovered behind a wall. Someone placed it there, probably deliberately, but the person never wrote a note explaining why. History shrugs softly. Witchcraft remains another shadow in the background. By 1740, the famous Salem witch trials are almost half a century in the past. The intense prosecution of alleged witches associated with the late 17th century has declined dramatically in British North America. That does not mean belief in witchcraft vanishes overnight. Cultural beliefs survive legal enthusiasm. Some people continue to believe that harmful supernatural actions are possible. Others become increasingly skeptical. Educated opinion changes. Courts become less willing to treat accusations as they once did. The memory of earlier disasters also matters. Salem itself becomes an example of what can happen when accusation, fear, local conflict, questionable evidence, and institutional authority combine. Even within the original crisis, people disagreed. By your year, skepticism has strengthened considerably. Still, imagine that livestock suddenly become ill. Milk spoils unexpectedly. A child suffers unexplained fits. A neighbor with whom you recently argued happens to be nearby. Human suspicion begins constructing patterns. Perhaps nothing follows. Perhaps gossip does. And remember how powerful gossip is in this society. An accusation does not need to reach a courtroom to damage a reputation. Folk healing can become entangled with such fears. A person known for unusual remedies may be valued when treatment works and regarded suspiciously when circumstances turn against them. Knowledge creates authority. It can also create vulnerability. This is especially true where cultural differences are involved. Indigenous spiritual practices are frequently misunderstood or condemned by European colonists. African religious traditions carried by enslaved people may be interpreted through hostile European categories that distort what practitioners actually believe. Written colonial sources often describe unfamiliar practices using terms chosen by outsiders. Historians therefore have to read cautiously. When an English observer calls something magic, you're learning as much about the observer as about the practice being observed. The evening grows darker. Someone adds wood to the fire. Shadows move across the wall. Now the psychological power of these beliefs becomes easier to understand. Your world after sunset is genuinely dark. A candle illuminates only a small area. Beyond that circle, shapes become uncertain. Wood contracts with changes in temperature. Animals scratch inside walls. Branches touch roofs. Wind enters gaps. A fox cries somewhere in the distance. You cannot identify the sound. Excellent. Your imagination immediately volunteers. Stories heard since childhood begin supplying possibilities. Perhaps a strange noise is merely a mouse. Perhaps you know perfectly well it is a mouse. You still pull the blanket higher. Reason and fear are not mutually exclusive. You know this from your own century. You can understand exactly how a horror film was produced and still check the hallway afterward. Your colonial companion is no different. Religion provides comfort against these uncertainties. Prayer structures morning and evening. Scripture offers meaning. Church communities provide belonging. Funeral rituals confront mortality. Sermons explain moral order. But unanswered questions remain. Why this illness? Why this dream? Why did the candle suddenly go out? The wind, probably. Probably. You look toward the dark window. The neighbour who mentioned the bird has stopped talking about it. Perhaps she feels reassured. Perhaps not. Outside, ordinary life continues beneath a sky without electric light. And as the conversation turns toward tomorrow's obligations, another invisible structure becomes clearer. Not everyone around this fire has equal freedom to interpret the world. Speak publicly, own property, choose work, travel, or control the future. Status determines almost everything. The chair you occupy, the clothes you wear, the work you perform, whether you can leave, even whether the law recognizes you as fully free. The strangest customs of 1740 are not all amusing. Some are woven into the hierarchy holding the entire colonial world together. You look around the fire again, and the room changes without anything physically moving. The chairs are not simply chairs. The clothing is not simply clothing. Even the positions people occupy around the hearth can reflect a society intensely aware of rank. In 1740, equality is not the organizing principle of ordinary social life. Hierarchy is. People understand themselves through overlapping categories of wealth: gender, age, race, occupation, religion, family reputation, legal status, and social rank. These categories differ across colonies and communities, but the basic assumption that society contains unequal stations feels perfectly normal to many people living within it. You can see status before anyone speaks. Clothing provides one clue. Fine imported fabrics cost money: lace, silk, carefully tailored coats, elaborate accessories, and fashionable details can announce prosperity. An ordinary labourer's clothing is more practical, frequently repaired, and constructed from materials suited to work and household means. You do not necessarily need to ask whether a man is wealthy. His coat may begin answering for him. The same applies to houses, furniture, tableware, books, portraits, silver, the number of rooms, the number of servants, the quantity and quality of food offered to guests. Material objects speak constantly. Colonial society becomes increasingly consumer-oriented during the 18th century, as imported goods circulate more widely through Atlantic trade. People who are not members of the highest elite can acquire objects that imitate elite fashions. This creates opportunity. It also creates anxiety. If ordinary people can dress more fashionably, how do you know who is important? Apparently status has discovered one of its eternal problems. The wealthy must keep moving the target. Manners therefore matter too. How you speak, how you stand, how you greet someone, where you sit, whether you remove your hat, how you behave at a table. Social rank is performed through tiny rituals that everyone learns to read. Titles carry weight. Family connections matter. Reputation matters. A prosperous merchant may possess enormous local influence without aristocratic blood. Wealth and commerce complicate inherited ideas about rank, especially in colonial societies where traditional European hierarchies are being transplanted into different economic environments. There is mobility, but do not confuse mobility with equality. A poor labourer cannot simply announce that social hierarchy feels outdated and expect everyone to applaud. Economic dependence follows him everywhere. Servants illustrate this clearly. Indentured servitude remains part of colonial labour systems. A person may contract to work for a master for a fixed period in exchange for passage across the Atlantic or other considerations. During the term of service, freedom is restricted. The servant cannot simply walk away because the arrangement has become unpleasant. Contracts and laws give masters significant authority. Runaway advertisements reveal how often servants reject that authority anyway. Descriptions may include age, clothing, accent, skills, physical characteristics, and suspected destination. The advertisement treats the runaway as someone who must be recovered. Yet an indentured servant's condition is legally temporary. That distinction separates indentured servitude fundamentally from racialized hereditary slavery. By 1740, slavery is deeply established across British North America, although its scale and economic role differ dramatically by region. In plantation colonies such as South Carolina and Virginia, enslaved African labor is central to major agricultural economies. Slavery also exists in northern colonies and towns. Enslaved people work in fields, workshops, kitchens, docks, ships, households, and skilled trades. They are present throughout colonial society more widely than many simplified popular images suggest. The strangest and darkest feature is how ordinary the system can appear to those benefiting from it. Human beings are listed in inventories, bought, sold, inherited, advertised. Their labor is calculated economically. Families can be separated, movement can be restricted, violence supports the system, and law helps define the boundaries of bondage. There's nothing strange about this to the paperwork. That may be what makes the paperwork so disturbing. An account book can record human beings beside livestock, furniture, land, or tools with chilling administrative calm. Normality is powerful. A society does not need to wake each morning and consciously decide to defend every injustice it contains. Often people simply inherit institutions and learn to treat them as the natural shape of the world. Enslaved people, of course, do not passively accept that world. They resist in countless ways, running away, negotiating, preserving family relationships, maintaining cultural traditions, working more slowly, breaking rules, creating independent religious and social networks, acquiring skills, trading when possible, passing knowledge between generations. Resistance ranges from quiet acts of autonomy to organized revolt. The famous Stono Rebellion has occurred only the previous year, in 1739, in South Carolina. That uprising deeply alarms white authorities. Enslaved men and women have already demonstrated that the plantation system is not accepted simply because slaveholders call it normal. In response, colonial authorities strengthened systems of surveillance and control. So beneath the apparently orderly world of plantations and ports lies constant tension. Power must be enforced precisely because people resist it. Gender creates another hierarchy. Under English common law traditions, marriage can sharply limit a woman's independent legal identity through the principle later commonly described as coverture. A married woman's property rights and contractual powers are constrained. Although actual rules vary across colonies and circumstances, widows can occupy a different legal position. Single women can sometimes conduct business and hold property in their own names. Women run shops, manage farms, keep taverns, work as midwives, produce goods, participate in family businesses. They are economically indispensable. Yet formal political power remains overwhelmingly male. Voting rights are restricted and tied to qualifications that differ by colony, usually involving property or economic standing, and women are excluded from formal electoral politics. Even among men, political participation is not universal. Your modern assumption that adulthood automatically produces equal citizenship does not belong here. Religion can create additional boundaries. Some colonies establish particular churches or privilege certain denominations. Others are known for greater toleration. Legal restrictions affecting Catholics, Quakers, Jews, dissenting Protestants, or others differ according to time and colony. British North America is religiously diverse, but tolerance is uneven. Again, there is no single colonial experience. Then comes race. Colonial law increasingly creates racial categories with enormous consequences. Whiteness becomes connected to legal privilege and freedom, while African ancestry becomes increasingly associated with hereditary enslavement. These categories are not timeless biological facts. They are being constructed socially and legally. Laws concerning marriage, inheritance, testimony, movement, weapons, labor, and status help harden racial boundaries. This process is one of the most consequential developments occurring around you. People in 1740 do not use every racial category exactly as later Americans will. And historians debate how particular identities develop across regions and decades. but the direction is unmistakable. Race is becoming embedded in law and economic power. You notice something else. Everyone learns a hierarchy. Children learn whom to address respectfully. Servants learn where they may go. Enslaved people learn which movements invite punishment. Women learn the boundaries surrounding reputation. Poor men learn how wealth changes treatment. Elite families learn how to display authority. Society reproduces itself through daily habits, not only through grand laws, through doors, seats, clothing, forms of address, who serves dinner, who eats first, who speaks, who listens, who is allowed to leave. That is why social history matters. Power hides inside ordinary routines. You return your attention to the fire. One person owns the house. Another works under contract. Another may be enslaved. A child obeys an adult. A wife occupies a legal position different from her husband's. All are physically close. They experience the same smoke, the same cold night, the same candlelight, but they do not inhabit the same world. Outside, darkness is fully settled. Doors are being secured. Shops are closing. People are preparing beds. The crowded streets grow quieter. Soon you will return to the sleeping place where this strange day began. One final stretch of ordinary colonial life remains. Night, and without streetlights, electricity, central heating, modern locks, emergency services, or a private bathroom down the hall. Darkness is going to make everything feel different again. The darkness outside is deeper than you expect. You know intellectually that electric streetlights do not exist in 1740. But knowing this and standing inside it are very different experiences. Once the last traces of daylight disappear, the landscape changes. Buildings become silhouettes. Trees merge into darkness. A road you crossed easily during the afternoon becomes uncertain ground. Holes, mud, animals, fences, and obstacles wait beyond the small circle of light you can carry with you. If the moon is bright, you are grateful. If it is not, you understand why people pay attention to the moon more carefully than most modern city dwellers ever need to. Inside the house, darkness is pushed back rather than defeated. A candle burns, perhaps several, if the household can afford the extravagance. Candles may be made from tallow or beeswax, among other materials. Tallow candles are generally cheaper and can produce smoke and odour. Beeswax burns more pleasantly but costs more. Artificial light therefore has an economic value you can see disappearing in front of you. Every hour of unnecessary illumination consumes material. You do not leave candles burning throughout empty rooms merely because darkness looks unfashionable. You carry light where you need it. A lamp can serve the same purpose, using available oils or fuels depending on region and household. Still, illumination remains local. The room beyond the flame fades quickly into shadow. Your eyes adjust. People arrange evening activities around this limitation. Work requiring fine vision is easier during daylight, although spinning, sewing, reading, repairing equipment, and other tasks can continue by firelight or candlelight when necessary. The hearth becomes the natural centre. You gather near warmth and illumination simultaneously. Remember that smoky fireplace from your first morning. You forgive it somewhat now. It is keeping winter outside. The fire also requires attention through the evening. Fuel has been collected, split, dried, carried, and stored. Someone decides how much wood can be used overnight. Too little and the room becomes bitterly cold. Too much and valuable fuel disappears quickly. Comfort is budgeting. Before bed, doors are secured, locks exist, but their quality and availability vary. Prosperous urban house may have substantial hardware. A poorer dwelling may depend on simpler mechanisms, bars, latches, shutters, and the comforting presence of other people. Again, your crowded household suddenly seems useful. You are rarely alone. In towns, night watches may patrol streets. Systems differ from place to place, but watchmen can keep an eye out for fires, disorder, suspicious activity, and other dangers. Fire is especially terrifying. Colonial towns contain many wooden structures packed close together. Homes use open flames constantly. Fireplaces, candles, lamps, cooking fires, One careless moment can become a neighbourhood disaster. Buckets may be kept ready, communities organise responses. Some towns develop early fire companies and equipment, but there is no modern emergency service capable of arriving within minutes with powerful engines and pressurised hoses. If someone shouts that a house is burning, you may become the fire department. People form bucket lines. Neighbours rush outside. Property is dragged away from danger. Church bells or other alarms can summon assistance. The community that spent all day watching your behaviour now becomes extremely welcome. That is the bargain again. Very little privacy, very little anonymity. But when your roof catches fire, everyone knows exactly where you live. Night also changes travel. You do not casually decide at 10 o'clock that you need something from a shop. The shop is closed. The street is dark. Your horse requires preparation. Travel carries additional risk, so daily schedules remain more closely connected to natural light. Not perfectly, of course. Taverns remain active. Social gatherings continue. People visit neighbours. Urban nightlife exists in its 18th century forms. But darkness imposes a cost. You need light. You need confidence in the road. Perhaps you need company. In some towns, regulations govern nighttime behaviour. Watchmen may challenge people moving at suspicious hours, and these restrictions do not affect everyone equally. Enslaved people can face especially severe limits on nighttime movement, sometimes requiring passes or permission. Slave patrols and other systems of surveillance develop particularly in plantation regions. Darkness may offer opportunities to visit family, socialize, worship independently, or escape surveillance. It can also bring enormous danger if authorities decide your movement is unauthorized. Once again, the same night contains different realities depending on who you are. Back inside, preparations for sleep begin. You remove outer clothing. Garments are folded, hung, or placed where they can be found easily in darkness. Clothing represents too much labour and money to scatter casually across the floor. Shoes matter especially. Tomorrow's street remains muddy. Then you encounter your old friend, the chamber pot. There it waits beneath the bed with quiet confidence. You now understand why. The privy is outside. The night is cold. The path is dark. Perhaps rain is falling. Perhaps snow covers the yard. Perhaps something moved near the fence earlier, and nobody established what it was. Suddenly the chamber pot feels like advanced technology. You use it. We will grant you privacy. The 18th century rarely does. Bed curtains, if your bed possesses them, can help retain warmth while creating a small enclosed space. Heavy bedding traps heat. A warming pan filled carefully with hot coals may sometimes be used to warm sheets, although careless handling carries obvious fire risks. Imagine slipping into genuinely warm bedding during a freezing night. For a moment, 1740 feels luxurious. Then another person climbs in beside you. Ah yes, we had forgotten. The shared bed. You move over. Perhaps this is a sibling, spouse, relative, or familiar companion. If you are travelling, the arrangement could be more socially adventurous. Either way, warmth is valuable. Human bodies provide it freely. Outside, the town settles. A horse shifts somewhere. A dog barks. You hear footsteps. Perhaps the watch. Perhaps a traveller returning late. Perhaps someone visiting a tavern considerably longer than intended. No glowing windows illuminate the horizon. No aircraft blink overhead. No engines hum continuously. Mechanical noise exists around mills, ships, workshops, clocks, and other technologies, but much of it fades when work stops. What remains is organic. Wind, animals, fire, voices, rain against a roof, timber creaking, the occasional snore beside your ear. You think back through the day. You woke in a crowded room and used a chamber pot. You washed from a basin rather than standing beneath a shower. You cleaned your teeth with methods that made modern toothpaste seem miraculous. You watched people drink cider without waiting for evening. Children worked beside adults. Pigs wandered through human spaces. Streets served as roads, drains, markets, and workplaces simultaneously. Illness brought remedies that range from useful plants to treatments capable of making the patient considerably less enthusiastic about medicine. Death remained physically close. Punishment became public. Privacy had to be negotiated. Dreams and strange events could carry meanings beyond what your modern instincts expected. And beneath everything stood hierarchy. Wealth, gender, race, freedom, legal status, reputation. The strangest discovery is that none of these things feel strange to the people around you. That is the quiet trick history plays. Normality is temporary. Every age develops habits so familiar that people stop seeing them. Colonial Americans do not wake each morning thinking, how wonderfully historical everything looks today. They are simply living, just as you are. And perhaps someone 300 years from now would find your own ordinary routines equally peculiar. The objects you throw away. The hours you spend looking at illuminated screens. The food travelling thousands of miles to reach your table. The enormous machines carrying one person down a road. The private bedrooms. The endless running water. Perhaps they would whisper about you with the same gentle disbelief. You close your eyes. The candle is extinguished. Darkness fills the room immediately. The fire gives one final soft crack. Someone beside you shifts beneath the blankets. And 1740 becomes quiet. The strange world you entered this evening begins fading now. Slowly and gently, until the muddy streets. Wandering pigs, crowded rooms, flickering candles, wooden houses, distant horses, and low winter fires soften into shadows. You do not need to carry the buckets anymore. You do not need to tend the hearth. The morning chores belong to another time. The street outside can empty without you. The watchman can continue along his dark road, his footsteps growing softer with every passing moment. Let the candlelight disappear. Let the voices fade behind closed doors. Let the old houses settle beneath the night. And as you rest comfortably in your own century, with all its strange habits waiting quietly for some future historian to discover, allow the distance between then and now to become wider. The fire dims. The room grows still. The last hoofbeats disappear somewhere beyond the sleeping town. And there is nothing more you need to do tonight. Just rest, just breathe, and let history drift quietly away.